Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Marsha Gordon. I'm the president and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. We are thrilled to be continuing our very impactful conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice, developing and implementing effective DEI strategy. And we have an incredible panel of experts. We especially want to thank our sponsors, Balancing Life's Issues, Con Edison, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Heineken, Webster Bank, and Wells Fargo. You know, a company culture that values and supports diversity, equity, and inclusion requires an intentional approach to DEI. Having a strong strategy enables companies to move beyond just talking to taking actions that ensure that everyone feels secure, respected, and valued. Today, we will hear from leaders of some of Westchester's top companies, as well as from diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals on how best to develop and implement long-term effective strategies. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Melissa Andrews. She is Chief Diversity Officer and Chief Client Relations Officer of Dorff, Nelson, and Zatterer, LLP. Melissa is an experienced litigator who leverages her background in law to lead Dorff, Nelson, and Zatterer's LLP's diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging initiatives as the Chief Diversity Officer. She also serves as the company's Chief Client Relations Officer, tapping into her experience in marketing, business development, and recruitment to drive business growth within the firm. Melissa is also a proud ambassador to the Business Council of Westchester. We're very pleased to thank Melissa for her leadership and to turn this over to take away the program. And we do encourage you to submit questions and comments in the chat box, and we will be back at the end. Melissa, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marsha. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel today. We have Dr. Stephanie Akunvabe. She's Associate Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at Pace University. We have James Francis, Director for DEI for Balancing Life's Issues. We have Connie Kim, Head of Talent Management and Belonging at Heineken USA. We have Tashia Levy-Grant, who is Senior Vice President, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Webster Bank. We also have Bernie Ramos, Managing Director, Diverse Segments, Hispanic Segment Leader at Wells Fargo Commercial Banking. We have Matilde Roman, SVP and Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Officer at Westchester Medical Center. We have Tobias Thornwell, CPSM, Senior Strategic Sourcing Manager at MGM Resorts. Good morning, everyone. Some of you are on mute.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I'm excited for this panel, and we're going to kick it right off with Dr. Stephanie. So how do you approach developing and implementing an effective DEI strategy at a university?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here. And so when you think about a university, higher education is really sort of a unique sector. And sort of as we were going around introducing everyone, part of the reason we're so unique is because we intersect with so many different industries. Whether you're thinking about finance or community partners or policy pieces or private industry or public industry, essentially higher education is expected to be responsive to sort of all of these different nuances. So we aren't only sort of building DEI strategy that is taking into account our internal stakeholders and thinking about what are the needs of students, what are the sort of learning outcomes that we want to craft when we're thinking about what does it mean for example, right now I'm working for Pace University. What does it mean to have a Pace University degree? And what does it mean to sort of have certain notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion embedded in what student learning is going to look like? We're also really subjected to external factors, for example, like we experienced a health COVID crisis, right? And thinking about sort of what were the health disparities and how did that impact the learning of certain students, impact access for faculty who might have had to shift to online teaching modalities, for example. So in terms of developing a strategy, it really has to be multifaceted, partially because we are impacted and subjected to so many different external factors. So higher education is really, really unique in that way. And the best way, I think, to sort of build a strategy is to always be prepared to pivot. So I'll stop there because there's so many of us who I also want to hear from other perspectives.
Thank you. So James, how do you define DEI and how would you implement an effective, sustainable strategy?
Well, thank you, Melissa, and good morning, everyone. To me, DEI is really the approach of principles being formed to create this workplace culture and environment for everyone, but not just where a culture in which everyone's represented, but in which equitable practices are provided, right? Everyone is treated fairly, everyone is heard from. That's the real definition of DEI to me. But diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging overall, it's the combination of these four concepts that will create the organizational culture and values. That's, to me, exactly what DEI stands for. To implement these strategies, organizations need to realize that DEI is not a one-size-fits-all conversation, right? We must be very specific to what your group needs, what this specific organization needs are. And how do we get that? How do we obtain this information? Please gain perspectives from everyone. You hear me say everyone and all quite often today, because these are everyone conversations, but really gain those perspectives and feedback from everyone. And the feedback you receive, those are the DEI and B strategies and initiatives that you should lead within your organization specifically. And it tends to really work long-term, strategically.
Thank you, James. So this kind of dovetails into the next question for Connie. What are some questions organizations should ask themselves when considering developing and implementing a DEIB strategy?
No, thank you, James. I feel like we're tag teaming here, so thank you for that setup.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. So I completely agree with James, with noting that DEI is truly the DNA of an organization, and the opportunity is to bring it to the surface and to really have that be spread throughout the organization. Some of the questions that I think are key for any organization to think about is, quite frankly, starting from the beginning, do you believe in DEI? Don't do it just because it's the nouveau type of thing to do and there's a lot of press about it, but truly take a look inside and figure out, do we as an organization, as a leadership team, really believe in this effort? The other thing that also goes hand in hand with that is, does it speak to our values? Is this important to us? And really trying to be very clear about what is it when we talk about our values. It's not because we're fearful that if we don't do DEI, we'll get backlash. That is a fear-based value. What we need to really orient ourselves is to really understand, what is a truth-based value? What do we really truly believe in, with no consequences, and dealing with whatever the outcome may be? What's it mean to our organization? And what's it mean to you as a leader? Does it really connect with you and how you want to lead others? Because that really needs to come through in the way that you talk to your people, and also the way that you inspire and motivate others. The other piece of it also is, what voice isn't being represented. It's not just an overarching effort, but really being very specific about who are we, or what type of people are we trying to really build a platform for, so their voices can be heard. And finally, this is really important. It's great to talk about it and to come up with a strategy, but are we willing to do the work? Okay, and so that is the other important piece. And you all are very, impressive people, fellow panelists, but those also on the call, is it's a strategy is only as good as how well it's executed. So really being clear about what the work requires to get it done.
Thank you. Is it also about holding people accountable when they don't?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the other big piece of it. So thank you, Melissa. It's very much that accountability piece. Once you set it up, it's also not only about making sure that people understand it and are on board with it, but it's also being very clear about what does it mean if we don't do it. And so accountability is critical for all of this to hang together.
Thank you, Connie. So Tashia, we're really excited to learn about this one. So how did you develop your strategy at Webster Bank?
Thank you very much. A great question, Melissa. And thank you for my fellow panelists. I'm just sort of going to build off of a lot of what they've already spoken about. And so I do agree that I do not think it is sort of the one size fit all, that you just kind of look what another organization has done and just co-opt that for your organization. I think it's important to be able to sort of benchmark and identify and use your data to be able to, dive deeper and figure out within your own organization, sort of what is going on so that you can set some benchmarks, right? I also think it's really important when you're creating strategy, and some of the things that I did is to speak and listen, to do a road tour, to make sure that you're not just focusing on the senior leaders. However, I will add as a caveat, as you've already pointed out, about accountability. I think it's really important, as Connie also said, to ensure that there is a commitment to DEI, that it's not, for me, transactional, right? The checkbox, we did this. So it is important to have buy-in, but it's also important, I think, for the entire organization to be on board, right? So thinking about focus groups, thinking about survey results, thinking about colleague engagement surveys, what do our colleagues need? What are the gaps? To be able to sort of analyze all of that and talk to colleagues and see what they need. And also all of your stakeholders, right? Ensuring that one, there is a true commitment, but two, that you can really identify the areas that you really want to focus your energy and efforts. And I think, after you've sort of identified through data, you've spoken to colleagues, you've listened, I think then you put all of that learning into action. And I think that that's where you sort of are able to create the strategy, right? To be able to build a plan and think through strategically how you're going to, one, execute it, but two, as you said, how we're going to measure success. What does accountability look like? And ultimately,
Okay, thank you, Tashia. So Bernie, tell me, how does helping employees create opportunities for building networks, and why is that important to a DEIB strategy?
So thank you, Melissa, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think about networking a lot, and to build off some of the points that were made already, in the one size does not fit all bucket. The different diversity groups are different in and of themselves, right? So at Wells Fargo, for example, we found that some groups are a bit more vocal and willing to ask for what they want, others are not. And being Hispanic, I can speak to the fact that we are typically have been a bit more quiet, hardworking. You're sitting there waiting for, I'm doing a really good job. I have my degree. My boss likes me, so he's going to take care of me. And you're sitting there waiting for that promotion, that raise, for that DE&I strategy to come landing on your desk. Not the way it happens. So networking is a critical part of that career path ownership, right? So making sure that you're known, that you're visible, that you obviously baseline, doing a great job, but you have to step outside your comfort zone, network with people that look like you and that don't look like you, people that are lateral to you, theoretically under you in the organization, and certainly above you. You have to find those opportunities. When, Doctor mentioned COVID, and I think about, how folks are more apt to want to work remotely these days, but they also want to get promoted and be known and be visible. Networking is the key to understanding what the opportunities are in an organization, to learning from others, to getting advice about what career opportunities may be relevant to you, identifying skills that may be a bit valuable to other parts of the organization that you don't even understand, especially when you work in a huge organization. So being visible is a critical part of your, why you network. and your career path journey. And really important that as part of a broader strategy, you're creating those opportunities, you're facilitating those opportunities, but you're creating that sense of ownership in the individual. You know, it's not just what the company's going to do for you, but it's what you're going to do for yourself. There's a dual ownership in that career path, and networking is a critical part of that.
I also think that networking, you feel like you belong in the organization or wherever you are. It sets a sense of inclusion too.
Right, a sense of belonging, absolutely. When you network, you understand other parts of the organization. You build a group of folks that now you understand the organization better. And when you network outside your own diverse group, you learn about other people. And you know, somebody said, maybe it was James, all, and that is all, because we're not just networking with people that look like us, that act like us, that live where we live. It's about, you know, being uncomfortable while you learn about other people and learn about the organization. So absolutely agree with you, Melissa.
Thank you, Bernie. So Matilde, what elements should be considered when developing a DEI strategic plan?
So thank you for BCW for the opportunity to present among these distinguished panelists. It's a great opportunity for WMC Health. And thank you for the question, Melissa. Part of the trick here is, you know, we've kind of all mentioned all the elements, and it's really a human experience and a people-centered approach. And what does that look like in practice? And a lot of this starts from leadership commitment. And how are we really ensuring leadership buy-in to the work, right? Meeting them where they're at and educating leaders of the essential elements and how DE&I really contribute to the return on investment for business and the business outcomes and the results, right? Because I think that's a critical piece, right? Because we can do as much as far as, I like Connie, like, you know, execution is really where we need to be, and we implement as we learn. But if we don't get the initial buy-in from leaders and we don't have the continuous efforts to engage them in an ongoing process and ensure that we are also bringing in other stakeholders into the conversation so that they can feel invested in the work, you know, that really is the quintessential kind of magic formula for building a successful D&I program within any organization, right? So it's really that communication that you push out that has to be consistent, has to be sustainable. It's about really thoughtfully engaging leaders and activating leaders to be the model champion for this work, right? And identifying those leaders within organizations and really helping build their capacity. And then the other key element is looking at, like, you know, so that's the top down approach. And then thinking, you know, as you're evolving in this work, what is your bottom up? You know, how do you really activate ERGs, right? And groups and the networking that Bernie mentioned to really kind of make sure that we are engaging all members across the organization in this work.
Thank you. So Tobias, is supplier diversity simply part of Fortune 500 corporate social responsibility initiatives to be good corporate citizens, or does it positively impact the bottom line?
Well, first, good morning, Melissa, and thank you to all the panelists this morning. Definitely loving all the insight and everything. And good morning, everyone. MGM Resort prioritizes supply diversity, and we implement its best practices. By diversifying our supplier base, we're able to tap into a broader range of goods and services, foster innovation, as well as competition and local market needs. This also allows us to reflect on the diversity of our customers, as well as the communities in our backyards. Yes, working with diverse suppliers positively impacts the bottom line, but more importantly, impacts the community. It is critical for Fortune 500 companies to support the community, both with jobs, outsourcing, volunteering, because it's the right thing to do. We're also at MGM Resorts, as we call it, and we like to say, is focused on what matters. And that's what we like to focus on. As a leader in hospitality and entertainment, MGM Resorts strongly believes in supply diversity as a key part of our corporate culture, as well as an element of our success.
Thank you. So Dr. Stephanie, universities often face challenges in fostering an inclusive and equitable environment for student, faculty, and staff. Can you share any specific strategies or initiatives you would implement to ensure the success of PACE's DEI efforts?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to maybe tie a few threads together based on what some of the panelists have shared. One of the things that I think that is really important, I started saying this a few years ago, is in order to make sure that students, faculty, and our staff are really feeling like they are included and that our strategies are more than just empty words and that we're really going to actually stick to what it is that we said. I got to a point where I was like, if we're going to put it on the website, then we got to do something about it. Otherwise, take it off the website. Like, we can't be out here sort of selling empty promises, right? And so I just started saying that any DEI thing that we said we were going to do, one, it had to be sustainable and scalable, because sometimes with DEI, there's so many things that you could do that you have to really be able to sort of focus in and think about what's going to be sustainable and scalable so you can see that sort of long-term impact that you want to really build for an institution. The other piece that I think ends up being really important is making sure that the initiatives that you're building are what I always say, top down, bottom up, and across the board. And the reason I use that language is very specific because you need like folks were saying earlier, you have to have that leadership component. But the reality is sometimes there's a disconnect from the very top. And especially when we're at a university setting, like I need the perspectives of the folks who are dealing with students on a day-to-day basis to tell me where the gaps are. And so if I'm not listening to that sort of bottom-up perspective, it's impossible to build a strategy that's going to make a lot of sense. And so I'm always listening for that. And then the across the board piece is, again, there's these external factors that we got to be paying attention to. And so when I'm thinking about the board of the university, it cannot just be, right, sort of the senior administration, and then I got sort of my faculty and my staff that are here. The board, we gotta be on board with this too. So that top down, bottom up, across the board ends up being essential to making sure that the words that we're putting on the website actually hold something and they mean something to the people that are going to be in our institution, and also the people that we say we want to attract to the institution, because so much about higher ed is about recruiting, right, and attracting students who are going to be the movers and shakers of the world going forward. So we can't have these sort of empty promises out there.
Thank you. So speaking of external factors, James, given the external climate and political environment, where should we start or continue our DEI journey?
Well, I love the feedback from everyone because these are all large pieces to a puzzle. And I always like to remind people that this is an everyone conversation. And not meeting anyone you so far or not knowing anyone in the audience, we all checking a box. Whatever that box is, whatever that tends to be, whether it's gender, age, race, ethnicity, religion, political, we're checking 1,000 boxes. So just because that James Francis's box is not checked now, does not mean I cannot be empathetic if Connie's box is checked today. Right. So there's many, many pieces and reasons and allyship in which, where we can start, but it's always start now. It's a phrase that I always tend to use, that it's never a bad time to implement a positive strategy in your life. Never. So the where and the how is now, and it's through consistent conversation with everyone. That word everyone comes back again, right? What are the needs and the groups and the pockets that haven't tend to work, because we're not in the same space we were 5 years ago, right? This is a different world. And DEI strategies and initiatives, they should be fluid, because we will not be in the same place we are today 5 years from now. So it should be fluid and open to change. And organizations need to realize that this is a process. This is a process. These strategies may take months, it may take years, but to be sustainable and consistent, that's okay, right? And as Connie mentioned, it certainly starts from leadership. It certainly starts from leadership buying in that, hey, this may take time, but your return on investment certainly will happen. certainly will happen.
You can't rush it.
That's right. That's right. Positive things tend not to happen overnight.
Right.
It's that uphill battle.
So Connie, what are some of the pitfalls to be aware of as we are implementing our DEI strategies?
So I invite the panelists to please pile on to this, because I'm sure we all have learned through our processes and our efforts in trying to lift off a DEI strategy for any organization. But a couple things have been mentioned. Stephanie, I think you had mentioned this as well. It's really trying to make sure that you're building something that can last for a long time. I think that what is implied in that is certainly to ensure that what it is that's being proposed, that there is depth to it and there is connection back to the organization's DNA, so to speak, and that it can flow through every crack of the organization and fill those cracks potentially. And so at Heineken USA, one of the things that our mission for this year is to embed DEI capabilities in the business. We're trying to migrate from, and I think we have, from this compliance mentality of we've got to check the box, do this training and this learning, which is a great place to start. However, how do you progress from there so that our ultimate nirvana, in my opinion, is that DEIB is no longer a separate topic. It's just the way we do business. And that ultimately is what, in my opinion, we're trying to move this organization towards, and the hope for most organizations to do. So some of the pitfalls certainly include making sure that what it is being launched is not inauthentic, that there is an intentional aspect to what it is that we're proposing. It's engaging. It's no longer sort of this, oh, I got to do this, and, people's energy levels go down. But how can we make this engaging, and how do we help make it be part of how they are better individual contributors, better managers, better leaders? So from the people perspective, what we're trying to do is embed these DEIB principles and learnings through every type of development opportunity. So one example is we launched an inclusive hiring learning series for our managers to do a better job of bringing in talent, giving them a great experience going through their hiring process. But underlying that, we introduce what is unconscious bias and how do you check that during that process. Another chapter to that is inclusive onboarding. When you hire someone, we want to give them a great feeling and really build sort of excitement for them to be part of the Heineken USA or fill in the blank organization. And what was underlying that for managers that we introduced is the concept of privilege. How do you take and assess what privileges, what are the things that we know we have that we don't even realize we have, and bring that more to the surface and use that as a way to gift it to others that may perhaps not have that. So there are ways to embed it in the processes and not make it separate. So I think for me, it's really trying to find those critical points where it can be integrated versus feeling like it has to be a separate effort from everyday business.
I love that. So Bernie, how does helping others help you when you're implementing your DEI strategies?
I feel like it's part of that networking. The way I think about it, I came across, and I'm sort of, a little bit later in my career, right? So I came across a poem that struck me. I'm not very artistic or poetic, but it just happened to be looking at it, and it talks about building bridges, right? And it really spoke to me because it was a gentleman traversing a road. He came to a chasm, and older gentleman turned around and built a bridge over that chasm. And he was laughed at. And as many times people make comments about a lot of what I try to do internally and externally at Wells Fargo. And the reason he was laughed at, because at his age, he was never going to go down that road again. So kind of from a parallel perspective. But what he said was that he wasn't building that bridge for himself. He was building that bridge for those that come behind him. And, I feel incredibly privileged to be where I'm at in life and doing the things and going to the places I can go with my family. And I feel a deep sense of responsibility to be that bridge builder, to be that person that lifts others up, to commit my time and my resources where I can to lifting others up. They say rising tide lifts everyone, right? When James talks about everyone, it means everyone. Helping others means, speaking to them about what I see their potential is. A lot of diverse folks don't understand what their opportunities are, even what their skills are. They don't value themselves in a way that the market might. And I think breaking that cycle of, this is my limit. This is what I can do in life. I'm happy here, so let me not make any noise. Well, some of us are designed to make noise. And I think bringing people out of their shell, getting them more comfortable with themselves and how I perceive them, how others perceive them, it lifts up the organization. Helping describe, to the business imperative. We talk at Wells Fargo about D&I from a business imperative perspective. We talk about how we need to look like the customers we want to serve, right? Not in every case, but much more than we do today. And I think lifting others up, making them aware of how they could potentially move in the organization, they could develop their careers, or even outside the organization, is something that I get great satisfaction from. But it helps, the cause, help people identify with opportunities that they don't see. And, I could talk about this for 3 hours, but I won't. But this is, true to, kind of how I live my life every day and the way I give back. And so it helps the organization. And it gives me a sense of satisfaction when I see people, light up and move on and getting that feedback. And I don't do it publicly for notoriety. I don't need pats on the back. This is my way of acknowledging that I was blessed. I am blessed, after growing up in a pretty bad place in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm doing things that I never imagined I could do, that I never even thought about. And I feel like I own that responsibility, and I own, the opportunity to help others is just embedded in me because of my gratitude. So.
Oh, I love that, Bernie. Thank you. In my world, it's called mentorship and sponsorship, where we are lifting up the younger attorneys, especially the diverse ones who don't have the opportunity. So I love that. Totally agree.
Thank you.
Tashia, what are some ways to ensure our DEIB programs and initiatives are sustainable in this environment of backlash?
Thank you, Melissa. I think that's a great question, and I see some of that even chatter in the chat as well, right? I think everyone is sort of thinking about this. It's at the forefront of all of our thoughts. Right? It's sort of like the elephant in the room. And I was on a webinar last week, and the speaker said something that really resonated with me that I'll share here. And she said, sort of in this environment, it's really a time for us to tell whether your audio in your organization match the visual. And I thought that was a really great way to put it, right? In terms of, are you really truly committed, right? Or are you now going to try to pull back because of, the Supreme Court decision, or there have been all of these questions around DE and IB programs. And so in this environment, I really think it's important for companies to really take that internal microscopic look to see what your true commitment is to DE and IB, and whether or not this is something that you see as, embedded, or that you want to have embedded into the DNA of your organization, as we've talked about, where it's not sort of this aside, this not sort of this, hey, it's a nicety, something that we would like to do. I think some ways that, organization can ensure that, the programs that they're thinking about are really sustainable, and that even in this environment, that they are not challenged or thinking through, hey, will I need to pull back, or, to be a little bit more like critical, or for instance, do I just dial back? I've seen a few organizations where, there's no longer sort of the chief diversity officer role, right? So I think it's really important that organizations are really thinking through, even in this environment, do you have a dedicated resource? Is there someone in your organization that also has the understanding, the nuanced understanding of what it's like to do this work? That also has some level of expertise, right? I've seen a lot where it's sort of like someone raises their hand and say, hey, I'm really interested, I'd like to do this. And that sort of becomes their role. I think it's also really important to be able to identify that whoever is doing this work also has some lived experiences and understand systemic issues and so forth, to be able to really understand and really do, I think, a great job in terms of both not just sort of disseminating policies and so forth, but really understanding why we need to do this work. I think some of our colleagues also alluded to some of the other things that I think are really important, right? Like in terms of thinking through our hiring processes, thinking through our trainings, are we addressing things like implicit and unconscious biases? Even within our hiring processes, are managers equipped and able to identify their own biases, not just even in hiring, but in terms of how we think about promotions? Or do we have sponsorship and mentorship programs in place? Are we really looking at the inequities in our organizations and how we can actively address them? And so, I also think it's really important to also think about ensuring that there is a culture of DE&I that is supported from the top, not just necessarily even from your CEO, but even at the board level, right? And I really love, some of the things that have been said already in terms of ensuring that the support is there, not just from the top to the bottom, but throughout the entire organization, to really ensure that, that this is a true commitment from the organization, and that DE&I is something that is sustainable, and that they do want to ensure that regardless of the environment, that this commitment truly stands. So that's kind of what I think. I'm sure others may have some thoughts about that as well.
Anybody want to jump in? Okay. Nope, no takers. So Matilde, in an organization so big as Westchester Medical Center, can you explain your process for moving from plan to action?
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to piggyback off what Tisha, in her thinking about what this looks like from a compliance. So I think about this from performative, like what does it look like as a good thing to do versus how do you really weld it? And a lot of the panelists talked about how we really think about, integrating, embedding, I call anchoring people, I like the term welding, into processes and practices that really have long-term sustainability for the work. And so as you're looking at this, and I think part of the strategy for many organizations is really understanding where the organization is in their current state, right? And there is a continuum of where we sit in organizations. So you're early on in this journey, and I always call the journey, and I like Bernie's kind of bridging, and I think about, you talk about bridges, I talk about the road ahead and the roadmap. How do we make sure that we are really centered on thinking about where we're at as an organization, right? And getting that firm baseline based on qualitative and quantitative data that really informs the organization's culture, how they're thinking about this work, and then what's our end game, and having the end in mind when we start in this journey, right? Because we have to understand where we're at and where we want to be in order for us to then fill in the gaps. And so as we're looking at this work, are we centered in looking at it? If you're in your early stages of organizational development, is it a compliance-based focus where we're checking off boxes and we're making sure that we are clearly focused on making sure that we are in compliance? Or are we moving forward and really thinking about what does this look like as an integrated process where that it really welded into all parts of the business, right? And that people take active ownership. And so part of the strategy in really making sure we activate is thinking about how do we build capacity and build the tools for the people within the organization to not only build their capabilities, but also empower them and give them the agency in order for them to really activate DEI within their functions and roles. And so really from the very beginning, so if you're starting new in your journey, is really thinking about where your organization is, thinking about values, looking at how people's understanding of this work, right? Because people have a variety of different ways of thinking about the work. And then figuring out in 3 to 5 years, where do you want to see yourselves? Like, what is that milestone that's going to say that we've benched and we've made it there? And then kind of working programmatically and with different stakeholders across the organization to really kind of make milestones and build that you can build upon, right? So there's a scalability aspect to this, right? So thinking about what are those small wins that you can build upon to really get you to a point where you're seeing the fruits, right? Because this is the long game, right? As James mentioned, we are in a space where we're not going to see the fruits of our labor, in 6 months or a year from now. but with consistency, we will be able to see the fruits of our fruition, right? Of how we're really realizing DEI within the organization in the next 3 to 5 years. And so for me, WMC is truly committed to really building a culture of equity where we're really applying an equity lens to our workforce. And what does equitable practice look like with hiring and retention and and development and promotion? How are we looking at equity from the patient perspective? How are we providing culturally responsive care? And then by extension, how are we really building capacity to make sure that we are invested in identifying disparities within communities and then helping to support communities to be healthier, right? And so building individual and community health. And that's kind of like the way we're thinking about this from a kind of what is applying an equity lens look like? And then what does a culture of belonging look like within the space, right? So that everybody feels affirmed and included as they're engaging with the institution. And then that, I believe that with equity and inclusion, right, we will have and we will attract diverse talent that is reflective of the communities in which we're serving, right? And so for us, we're leading with equity, we're leading with inclusion. So we understand those two elements in and of itself will then help attract the talent that we need in order for us to really make strides in all aspects of DE&I.
Thank you. So going from one big organization such as Westchester Medical to MGM, Tobias, what are some of the best practices implemented by larger corporations that you have seen as providing the greatest impact for diverse suppliers?
Good question. We was actually talking about that 2 weeks ago at the MSDC National Conference in Baltimore. Some of the best practices implemented by larger corporations would be having significant diversity programs, dedicated mentorship programs, development opportunities for diverse suppliers, and making sure diverse suppliers have access to the procurement department. Another thing I would say is having clear and inclusive diversity goals so folks know what they need to focus on, or more importantly, practices that support those on a larger level, such as, competitive payment terms for diverse suppliers. Diverse suppliers are known for having challenges, having access to capital and loans and so forth. So being able to have competitive payment terms and different options for payment terms allows them to do business better. Also, telling your story. Sometimes when we're talking about best practices, it always goes back to the numbers. I believe someone mentioned it earlier, checking the boxes, which obviously has a important part of it. You got to show people that you're performing. But telling the story, I think, is just as important, when you're looking at supply diversity and making sure the suppliers you're working with look like the community that you're in. It looks like your employee base. That, to me, tells a good story. And that might not always be able to check a box or show a number that represents that. Showing that you're working with the suppliers sometimes from a community that's in one of the lowest economic parts of the community. That brings a lot back in terms of their hiring when the communities. That also brings job opportunities. One of the gentlemen mentioned he was from a pretty rough neighborhood in Brooklyn. So if you use that neighborhood, for example, and you're able to work with a diverse business from that neighborhood, and now they're hiring people from that neighborhood, that's really how you build that neighborhood up. I know at one of our regional properties, they publish an impact report every single year. And yes, it shows the numbers, it shows the percentages, but it also goes into more detail of what are we doing with our mentorship program? What are we doing in the community? Who are we giving to? Where are we volunteering at? It tells a story about us adopting the school. This year report, we were able to say proudly that we donated X amount of coats and sneakers to children. It's great for kids to be able to go to school and focus on learning and not focus on what they're wearing, for example. And those are the different things you can do when you partner with diverse suppliers and you do things in the community to make it better. And I think that's just a great best practice involved.
Thank you. There are so many great questions coming in the chat that I want to have time to get to all, if we can. But I really appreciate everybody's insight on this. This is, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and we need to just keep at it and not give up. So let me. So I guess I want to ask all of the panelists, what does progress look like and how do you measure your individual success?
So I'll jump in a little bit here. So Matilda talks about milestones. So, it's been said repeatedly that this is not a quick fix. I think Matilda, given her medical focus, talked about DNA. And can you imagine how difficult that is? This is, where we are is the result of decades, hundreds of years of whatever you want to call it. So it's not going to change overnight. I'm hoping to live to see significant change, right? That's not an unreasonable mindset in my mind, because what I see, at least in my experience, is incredibly embedded. We seem to want to do the same things over and get different results, definition of insanity. But I think measuring progress with milestones, looking at the 3 to 5 year time frame and being very clear about what you're looking to achieve. We talked about accountability, right? Critical, right? We are looking at, I know of a couple of organizations, including ours, where the board gets a diversity scorecard. And each division is kind of like American Idol, above the line or below the line. That's accountability, right? Like, you need to achieve results at your division level. You're on the operating committee, you report to the CEO, and here's what the board's going to see about you. And this is how you're going to be evaluated and compensated. So I think the 3 to 5 year time frame for sort of interim milestones, but I think to get this embedded into the DNA of an organization is going to take significantly longer than that. So that we're not even thinking about it. It's just something we do because it's the right thing to do, and we can do good while we do well. But I think, interim milestones is the way to look at it. I don't think there's an end point. I don't think a lot of us are going to see where we want to end up in our lifetimes. And I think it's going to take that long, but I think in the interim, we can see some progress. Just my.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in. So with my organization, BLI, Balancing Life's Issues, it's a corporate training organization based in Westchester. I took it upon myself, and with the help of my colleagues, to be intentional about biases and change and measurables of that. So direct hiring practices. For example, let's say I had a client in the South Bronx. Me specifically, I was born and raised in the South Bronx. So the easy fix, send James, right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Be intentional with different perspectives and allow different perspective and lenses to be sent. Send Marsha Gordon. Send Connie Kim. Mine is the quick fix, right? Same James Francis. James Francis is not going. I want to be intentional about allowing different perspective and lenses, because that's how the audience will learn. That's how they will learn, from different stories, different ideas, right? Different brands. So to me, that I mentioned, we're not in the same place we were 5 years ago. And let's say 4 years ago, when George Floyd was murdered, everything changed. Everything changed for many, many people and organizations. So that was my measurable from right there with BLI. How can I change internally with identifying clients, with diverse training pools, with different people, different ideas? And now I can gladly say that the pool of trainers are certainly more diverse. But the inclusive part is allowing them to have their voice being heard within organizations. Diversity is a great start, but that inclusive and belonging practice is also part of the equation that we practice at BLI.
Can I add, as we're thinking about the work, and I'm glad you mentioned kind of George Floyd, like, there's this pendulum swing for organizations to commit to this work, right? And right after the murder of George Floyd, like, many organizations hired DEI officers, right, with the intent of like making a statement for, they had never done this before. And now we're seeing kind of this trend where there is, based on economic downturns and other aspects of the business, people are kind of shying away from this work. And there's a bit of, DEI fatigue as well. as it relates to the work. And for all of us who are doing this work, we just need to be vigilant, and we need to be consistent and persistent. It's about, and I love James, you said intention. I say intention, attention, and commitment, right? So we need to commit, and we need to be consistent in our intention to the work. And also, I would be remiss to not add the fact that when we're talking about this work, it's about intersectionality, right? Depending on where we stand in our social markers, it really informs, how our worldview and how we're thinking about this work as it relates to how we're engaging with one another. And so, this work is not easy, right? For all of us. I think, we all have our own set of challenges, but I think what I hear from many of the people on the panel is this strong commitment to really make change within people and organizations. So I applaud all of you for the work that you are doing, because it's not easy. I didn't mean to end there.
Melissa, do you want to jump in with some questions, or
Yes, I would love
are we
to.
ready? I didn't want to jump in too quickly.
No.
And we have some really great questions. We just want
Yeah.
to assure everyone that if we don't get to all of these questions, we use these questions, frankly, as a basis for the next conversation, because at the BCW, we don't have DEI fatigue. We think it's more important than ever. And we thank you all for your leadership. So
This question caught my eye from Marlene McLarty. Please speak to the distinction between inclusion and belonging, and how organizations can focus on the belonging aspect. And I open this up to everyone. Any takers? James?
If there's no takers, I'll take it real quick.
Yeah.
Belonging to me is recognition. Recognition from an organization to their team, to one another, really bring that sense of belonging, and it's very different from inclusion, right? So that sense of belonging is just me thanking Marsha Gordon for asking me to join this panel, right? Recognizing that she asked me when she could have asked many other people, and vice versa. So when we're recognized and thanked, and I know for me personally speaking, when people thank me for things, when I'm being appreciated, I'm certainly a more inclusive and belonging person to everyone else. So it ties into the entire DE&I process with that addition, that belonging piece.
If I may, this is Connie. From my perspective, I feel like DE&I, diversity plus equity plus inclusion, is an opportunity for a company to build the house for people to come in. So we're inviting different types of people. We're making sure that, people feel like they're equally treated. We're adding beautiful pillows and great lighting that dims and so forth. So there's that environment of feeling really good of being there. And that yields those individuals to feel like they belong. So that's the way I think about DEI and B, because for me, the ultimate goal for our people is that they can say, you know what, when I walk into Heineken USA, I feel like I belong. I feel like I have a voice. I feel like I have a great chair that I like to go to. I feel like I see people that look like me and that think like me or think differently, but I'm really curious. So for me, that's how I think about those components. They add up to hopefully individuals feeling like they really are part of a larger organization and part of the fabric of Heineken.
That's a great, this is Matilda. That's a great definition, Connie, and the way you framed it is perfect. I would dovetail on that and just share that belonging is a state of feeling like you can come in and be your authentic self at work. And inclusion really is those systems and processes that you put in place to create that environment. Right? Whether, even thinking about how you think about yourself as an introvert or extrovert, like how do you bring people to participate and contribute in conversations at meetings, right? It's not just, race and ethnicity and language and gender are all important aspects of who you are as a human being, but there are perspectives and thoughts and communication styles and how people think. And how do you also invite individuals that have different perspectives and thinking and communication styles to be a part and engage meaningfully and contribute, right? One of the quintessential things that as human beings we need to feel connected, right? We're social beings. We need to feel heard, and we want to contribute. We're working in an organization where we want to contribute. And how do you create those conditions that really create a sense of belonging within an organization?
Thank you. There's another great question in the chat that I want to ask you guys. So sometimes when we're discussing DEI, disability can sometimes be on the back burner. How do your organizations include disability focus within the DEI efforts?
I'll help take on that question. In regards to supply diversity, most companies look at just minority-owned companies and women-owned companies and veteran-owned companies. Here at MGM, we also look at disabled-owned companies as well as LGBTQ-owned companies. We partner with national organizations such as Disability Inc., for example, so we can actually have those pipelines to meet disabled suppliers to provide them opportunities. We also attend different networking outreach events surrounding, those individuals as well. So that allows us to engage and work with disabled-owned businesses.
Anybody else want to chime in on this question?
I can chime in as well. At Webster Bank, we also have a business resource group that supports our ADA BRG that supports colleagues with a disability and provide resources to other colleagues to learn about how to engage and think through how we work with colleagues that are disabled. We're also looking at developing some relationships and partnerships with some organizations to be able to provide us with additional training as well as resource in terms of onboarding colleagues that are disabled. So it's very much so integrated into the work that we do. We also take the opportunity during various affinity months to be able to provide educational resources to colleagues as well.
Anybody else before
Yeah.
we move on?
To this is to date, it's about what organizations are doing, but we're also trying to help managers understand different types of questions to ask of their people. So it's not just at the organizational level, but it's also helping managers understand when they hire someone, please consider asking, do you need any particular type of special setup of your desk, right? So there's not an assumption that whoever's walking in the door looks and can act and do this type of work with the way from the manager's perspective, but to keep it open and to ask and to be thoughtful about what those accommodations could be.
So here, hopefully we have time for one more question. What is the role of DEI with the rise of anti-Semitism? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll start. So I would say that I think right now, this is what I meant about higher education and sort of the need to sort of respond to sort of so many different things at once. I think we're seeing a rise in not just anti-Semitism, but also what it's really pointed to is a deeper need for us to understand sort of what interfaith looks like in a number of different spaces. I think within the realm of higher education, especially also within many areas of sort of the workforce, whether it be private or public sector, religion isn't an area that we typically have sort of like just brought into sort of the workplace. And so what I think it really has highlighted is an opportunity for us to create more encounters and spaces for interfaith understanding. Right now, there are organizations that I know and that I'm currently working with to create that sort of understanding around what allyship looks like for faith, for various faiths, recognizing again that even there's certain privileges that we carry by being a part of a certain faith. So if we're part of a monotheistic religion like Judaism, being Muslim or Christian, there's a certain privilege that even comes with that versus being a part of a polytheistic faith. And so how do we start to sort of learn across those differences becomes really, really important. And so I think that this moment in time has highlighted a need for us to expand sort of where we are, just general understanding of how that fits in terms of our conversations around inclusion and how we create the sense of belonging for people in different spaces.
Well, we could go on and on for another couple of hours, but I think Amanda, Marcia.
Yes, well, with that, I just want to thank everybody for your expertise, for your thoughts. This is a conversation, especially today, that absolutely must continue. And we thank you all. We thank all of the great the participants and especially our sponsors, Balancing Life's Issues, Con Edison, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Heineken, Webster Bank, and Wells Fargo. We thank you all. We encourage you to share what you've learned, because we are a community that works together, and we're really proud that Westchester County and the region is a community that has as a culture diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Melissa, you are a fabulous leader, and we thank you so much for your great moderation. And to all the speakers, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.